Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Michael wasn't the kind of man who stood out. He went unnoticed at parties, at work, even in the small neighborhood where he lived. His house, always with the curtains slightly closed, was an extension of his personality, discreet, almost faded, but with secrets kept in the shadows. At 38, without family or close friends besides Jake, he found himself sinking into a quiet routine, filled with a void he tried to ignore. Free time was a burden he didn't know how to handle, so he filled his days with what he called observations. The living room window, strategically placed, offered a perfect view of the neighborhood, especially the house next door where Jake and Rachel lived. Michael's relationship with Jake was cordial, based more on cohabitation than true friendship. Jake, always so confident and charismatic, was Michael's opposite. Maybe that was the reason for the silent admiration Michael had for his friend, or maybe it was just a way to feel connected to something bigger than his limited existence. Rachel, on the other hand, sparked a different kind of fascination. She wasn't just beautiful, there was something about her, a presence that seemed to fill any space she was in. Even in her daily tasks, there was a natural grace, something Michael couldn't quite define, but that kept him watching her longer than he'd like to admit. He told himself there was nothing wrong with observing, that it was just curiosity, but deep down he knew he was crossing a line. Every day, Michael became more skilled at calculating his neighbors' schedules and movements. He knew exactly when Rachel was home alone, what her habits were, even the songs she liked to listen to while cleaning the kitchen. It was knowledge that should belong to Jake, not him, but Michael ignored the growing guilt, convincing himself it was just an innocent pastime. Michael wouldn't admit it to anyone, even himself, but his favorite part of his observations was when Rachel came out of the shower. The routine was almost always the same. She let the steam escape through the bathroom door as she walked to the bedroom with a towel wrapped around her, with movements as natural as they were carefree. Rachel's bedroom window, often open, seemed like an innocent invitation that Michael, in his obsession, interpreted selfishly. She moved around the room, changing clothes as if the whole world wasn't out there, as if she was alone and safe in her privacy. For Michael, these moments were a mix of fascination and guilt, but he always returned to the window, unable to resist what he considered the best part of his spying routine. One day in particular, he approached the window once again. He watched Rachel upstairs, tidying something in her room. Time seemed to slow down as he watched her move around. But when he glanced toward the entrance of the house, he noticed something that snapped him out of his usual trance, a tall, unfamiliar man walking up to the front door. The man was carrying something in his hands, maybe a backpack, and seemed very comfortable, as if he was used to being there. Michael frowned, feeling a pang of discomfort. Who was that man? Why was he entering Jake and Rachel's house? And more importantly, what was he doing there when Jake was clearly away? The door opened, and Rachel came out to greet him. She smiled, a different smile than the one Michael saw when Jake was around. It wasn't the usual smile of a wife going through her routine, it was something more personal, more intimate. They exchanged a few words that Michael, despite being close, couldn't hear. The door closed, and the stranger stayed inside. Michael stepped away from the window, a mix of curiosity and anxiety growing inside him. Until that moment, everything he had observed was mundane, almost routine. But now there was something different, something he couldn't ignore. A man who wasn't Jake was inside Rachel's house. And he knew that no matter how hard he tried, it wasn't something he could simply forget. Michael couldn't get the scene of the man entering Rachel's house out of his head. It disturbed him in a way he couldn't even explain. It wasn't just the fact that someone else was coming in, it was the way Rachel greeted him, with that smile that seemed to hold a secret. No matter how hard he tried to convince himself it wasn't his business, his mind was obsessed with questions. Who was he? What was he doing there? And most importantly, why was Rachel acting so casually with a stranger while Jake was away? The next day, Michael was even more alert. He spent hours in the living room, eyes fixed on the window, waiting for the mysterious man to show up again. The waiting period felt endless, but to his surprise, the scene repeated itself almost at the same time. The man returned, this time with a small bag in his hand. Rachel opened the door quickly, as if she had been expecting him. They exchanged a few words, and once again, the door closed. Now, Michael's curiosity was bordering on unbearable. He felt like he was in one of those mystery movies where the protagonist stumbles upon something he shouldn't know. He got up from the couch, unable to stay seated, and started pacing the room. His mind conjured up increasingly complex scenarios. Was Rachel cheating on Jake? Or maybe that man was a distant relative. But why, then, was she hiding it? When the man left 2 hours later, Michael watched him with his eyes, following every step until he disappeared into the street. He tried to pick up something about his appearance, something that would help him understand more about who he was. The man was tall, had dark hair, and looked young, maybe in his 30s. There was nothing particularly threatening about him, but Michael couldn't ignore the growing discomfort he felt. In the days that followed, the man's visits became almost routine, and Michael, with the obsessive patience of someone who had nothing else to do, mentally recorded every detail. He knew exactly how long the man stayed, what he carried with him, and even the slight touch on the shoulder that Rachel gave him before closing the door on one occasion. That touch, though insignificant to any casual observer, seemed to confirm what Michael had already suspected: there was something between them that Jake didn't know. And it put him in an uncomfortable position. After all, should he tell his friend? Or would it be better to just ignore what he was seeing? As the days went by, Michael's discomfort turned into an almost desperate unease. He felt like he needed to do something, but any choice he made seemed wrong. Telling Jake would mean revealing his own obsession, and he wasn't ready to deal with the consequences of that. However, staying silent was equally troubling. The situation was like a game of chess, where every move carried a risk, and Michael found himself paralyzed in front of the board. The man kept showing up, Rachel kept welcoming him, and Michael kept watching, increasingly sinking into his own corrosive curiosity. Michael couldn't bear the weight of what he was witnessing anymore. The man's constant presence in Rachel's house was eating away at his thoughts, like a secret that was growing and threatening to spill. He was obsessed but also confused. Every time he saw Jake leaving for work with a carefree smile, something inside Michael screamed that it was his responsibility to tell the truth. But how could he reveal something without exposing his own behavior? Still, the moral dilemma began to suffocate him, pushing him toward the only decision that made sense at that moment: telling Jake everything. The opportunity came on a quiet afternoon when Michael saw Jake on his porch, having a coffee after work. Jake looked relaxed, completely unaware of the whirlwind of thoughts consuming Michael. Watching his friend, Michael hesitated. He didn't know where to start or how to lead a conversation that would inevitably bring up the questionable behavior he had been hiding. But the weight on his shoulders was unbearable, and he decided to take the risk. "Jake," he began, his voice shakier than he expected. "I need to tell you something. Something strange." Jake looked up, surprised but not alarmed. "What's up, man? Is everything okay?" Michael looked down for a moment before continuing. I've been noticing something. At your house. Rachel." He paused, realizing how disconnected his words sounded. He took a deep breath and tried again. "There's a guy who's been going there. Always when you're at work. I've seen him coming in several times." Jake's reaction was immediate and intense. His expression went from confused to furious in a matter of seconds. "What are you saying, Michael?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief and irritation. "What do you mean you saw this? Why are you watching my house like that?" That was the question Michael feared. He swallowed hard, feeling the discomfort rise in his chest. "It's not like that, Jake. I just was watching. Unintentionally. I can't explain, but I thought you should know. Jake suddenly stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at Michael as if he were seeing a stranger for the first time. You're telling me you've been spying on my wife? Is that it? And now you come and tell me this like some kind of hero? I just thought it was the right thing to do, Michael stammered, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But Jake's anger was palpable, and he didn't seem willing to listen. I'm going to handle this, Jake said, with a tone that left Michael uncertain whether he was talking about Rachel, the mysterious man, or their friendship. Before Michael could respond, Jake turned and went into the house, slamming the door behind him. Michael stood there for a moment, guilt and shame overwhelming him. He had told the truth, but at the same time revealed a side of himself he even despised. Now, everything seemed worse than before. Jake was furious. Rachel would probably find out about his intrusion, and that man remained a mystery. Michael didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain: he had thrown a stone into the river, and the ripples were just beginning. Jake walked into the house with firm steps, his heart racing and his mind racing. He felt a mix of indignation toward Michael and a growing unease about what he had just heard. The thought of another man frequenting his house while he was away left him in an unbearable position, caught between anger and doubt. But Jake wasn't the kind of man who sat around stewing over suspicions. He needed answers, and he wanted them now. Rachel was in the kitchen, distracted, chopping vegetables for dinner. When Jake entered, she immediately noticed the tension on his face. "What happened?" she asked, still holding the knife. But before she could say anything else, Jake went straight to the point. "Who is the man who's been coming here while I'm at work?" His voice was firm, but not aggressive. Still, Rachel froze for a moment, her eyes wide. The knife she was holding trembled slightly before she placed it on the counter. She knew what he was talking about, and that reaction was enough for Jake to realize she was hiding something. "Jake, please, listen to me before jumping to any conclusions," Rachel said, her voice filled with obvious nervousness. "I'm listening, Rachel." "Explain this now," he replied, crossing his arms, expecting an explanation that made sense. Rachel took a deep breath, and her expression changed. There was no more hesitation, but something between sadness and determination. "The man you're talking about is my brother, Ethan." The revelation hit like a bomb. Jake blinked, confused. Ethan? The Ethan who got out of prison? He knew who Ethan was, but for years Ethan had been out of Rachel's life, mainly because of the turbulent past that separated them. Jake had always believed he was a problem, someone who brought more pain than solutions. Rachel knew this, and that's why she had kept everything a secret. "Yes, he was released a few weeks ago," Rachel continued, her voice firmer now. "He's trying to start over, Jake. I didn't know how to tell you because you never trusted him. I thought if he had a chance to stabilize first, to prove he's changed, you might see him differently." Jake rubbed his hand on his face, trying to process what he had just heard. "And why did you hide this from me?" "Rachel, we're married. How do you think I'd feel seeing a man coming here while I'm not home? How do you think that looks?" Rachel took a step forward, holding Jake's gaze. "I know it looks wrong. But I was just trying to help my brother, Jake. He left with nothing, no one. And I'm the only family he has. You might not understand that now, but I did what I felt was right." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. Jake was still angry, but Rachel's explanation made him realize the situation was more complicated than it seemed. He knew Ethan's history and didn't trust him, but he also knew Rachel had always been the most generous and loyal person he'd ever known. Her decision to help her brother, even in secret, wasn't something he could just ignore. "And he's really trying to change?" Jake asked, breaking the silence with a question that sounded more like a concession. Rachel nodded, tears in her eyes. "He is, Jake. He's really trying. But he needs help. And I need you to trust me. Jake took a deep breath, still feeling the weight of anger and betrayal. But he knew this wasn't a battle he could fight without hearing from Ethan himself. If her brother was really trying to start over, he needed to see it for himself. I'm going to talk to him, Jake said, finally. But if I feel like he hasn't changed, you know what will happen. Rachel didn't argue. She just nodded again, relieved that Jake was willing to listen. But as he went up the stairs, his mind was already working on how to handle the conversation that was coming. He didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain: Ethan would have to prove, in every possible way, that he deserved this second chance. Jake scheduled the conversation with Ethan for the next morning, still torn between distrust and the need to fully understand the situation. He wasn't the kind of man who liked to give second chances, especially when it came to someone with such a problematic history. Still, Rachel's request and the way she defended her brother convinced him that it was better to listen before judging. But Jake wasn't willing to be fooled. He would enter the conversation with watchful eyes and ears, looking for any sign of lying or bad intentions. When Ethan arrived, Rachel opened the door, visibly apprehensive. He entered slowly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, but there was something in his posture that showed insecurity, almost as if he carried the weight of his mistakes in every movement. He greeted Rachel with a quick hug and, upon seeing Jake, extended his hand hesitantly. Jake took a few seconds before shaking it, his gaze fixed on Ethan's eyes, as if trying to decipher him before they even began to talk. They sat in the living room, with Rachel present but visibly tense. Ethan started talking first, as if he wanted to break the weight of the silence between them. "Jake, I know you have no reason to trust me," he said, with a firm but humble voice. "I've made mistakes, many mistakes, and I'm not going to try to justify anything. I've hurt people, disappointed my family, and I know I need more than words to prove that I want to change." Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression serious. "And why now? Why should I believe that this time is different?" The question came out sharp but direct, leaving Ethan with no choice but to be honest. "Because I have nowhere else to go," Ethan admitted. "I got out of prison with a backpack on my back and a history that closes all doors for me. I knew Rachel would be the only person who wouldn't turn her back on me. And I'm not going to lie, she's the reason I'm here now, sitting in front of you. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have even tried to start over." Jake remained silent, processing Ethan's words. There was something in his tone that seemed sincere, but Jake still wasn't convinced. "And what do you want from me, Ethan?" he asked, getting straight to the point. Ethan looked at Jake, and in that moment, his expression changed. It wasn't the look of someone seeking pity, but of someone fighting against pride to ask for help. "I'm not looking for charity," he said. "I want a chance. An opportunity to show that I can do something different. Rachel told me you have a business, that you might be able to offer me some work. I know you don't trust me, and I understand that, but if you give me this opportunity, I promise I won't waste it." The room fell silent again. Jake looked at Rachel, who was avoiding his gaze, clearly worried about her husband's response. He then turned his attention back to Ethan, studying every detail of his expression, as if trying to find a crack that would disprove his sincerity. But to his surprise, he found none. Jake finally leaned back in his chair, letting out a long sigh. "I'll tell you one thing, Ethan. If you agree to work for me, it won't be easy. I'm not going to go easy on you, and any sign that you're doing something wrong, you're out. No second chances. Understood?" Ethan nodded immediately, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Understood. I wouldn't expect anything less. Thank you, Jake. Really." Rachel let out a sigh of relief, but Jake still wasn't relaxing. He knew giving Ethan this opportunity was a risk, but he also understood that sometimes people needed a chance to prove they could be different. He wasn't doing this just for Ethan, he was doing it for Rachel. to show that he was willing to trust her and her judgment, even if he still felt a lingering doubt. The conversation ended with a handshake, but Jake made it clear that Ethan's actions would speak louder than any words. As Ethan left, Jake watched him through the window, walking slowly, like someone carrying invisible baggage. Something about that man seemed genuine, but only time would tell if that perception was true. Jake didn't fully trust him, but for now, he was willing to take the first step. Ethan didn't waste any time. Early on Monday, he showed up at Jake's business, ready to start. He wore a simple shirt, jeans, and worn-out boots, a combination that seemed to scream he hadn't found stability yet. He carried in his eyes an almost fierce determination, as if he understood that every day at that place would be a trial, a test to show he was committed. Jake, on the other hand, watched every move of his new employee with sharp eyes, looking for any slip-up. He had kept his word and wasn't willing to go easy on him. Ethan's first task was simple, but intentionally exhausting, carrying heavy boxes of materials to the storage area on the lower floor. Jake didn't explain why he chose this, but Ethan understood. It was hard, dirty work, without any glamour, something that didn't require total trust, but made it clear that he would start at the lowest level. Jake wanted to see how Ethan would react, if he would accept the task without complaining or show signs of impatience. Ethan not only accepted but threw himself into the work with a dedication that surprised the other employees. He carried box after box, without breaks, without asking for help. At the end of the day, his hands were marked, his muscles ached, but he was still standing. When Jake walked by the storage area to check, he found Ethan sweeping the floor, finishing the day as strong as he had started. "Everything okay there?" Jake asked, in a casual tone, but with eyes alert for any signs of dissatisfaction. "All good," Ethan replied, taking a deep breath but maintaining his composure. "What else do you have for me?" Jake just shook his head. "Tomorrow you'll have more work. Go home." Ethan nodded, grabbed his backpack, and left, leaving Jake with an internal dilemma. He didn't want to admit it, but Ethan had started well, maybe even better than he expected. Still, Jake wouldn't relax. Ethan needed to prove himself every day, not just in a moment of effort. However, while Ethan showed dedication at work, he still carried a darker side, something Rachel didn't see. At the end of a long week, Ethan made a decision that would change the balance of the situation. He knocked on Michael's door, the neighbor, and without any warning, appeared before him with an imposing presence. Michael felt the weight of his arrival even before seeing Ethan's face, who stood at the door, arms crossed, staring at him with penetrating eyes. "If you spy on my sister again, I'm coming back," Ethan said, his voice deep and threatening, but without raising his hand. "And next time, it won't just be a warning." Michael, paralyzed by fear, couldn't say anything. He just stayed silent, staring at Ethan, aware that any wrong move could escalate the situation. Ethan didn't move, remaining there, imposing, like a wall that wouldn't budge until his message was clear. Finally, Michael, unable to do more than a slight nod, felt the weight of shame take over him, knowing he was being confronted in a way he never imagined. Ethan then turned and left, leaving Michael at the door, immersed in a mix of regret and fear. For Ethan, it wasn't about physically hurting the neighbor, but about showing that he was no longer willing to tolerate any invasion of his family. For Michael, that heavy look was more than enough to understand the seriousness of what he had done. As Ethan headed back to his house, he felt he had fulfilled his role as a protector. He knew Rachel wouldn't notice the weight of this gesture, but for him, the message had been delivered, and any future threats would be met with the same silent intensity. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.